Welcome back, everyone. It is 12:30 here in New York City, and we are going to get started with the afternoon portion of the symposium. We will begin with the fireside chat and follow that with our two afternoon panels starting at 1:20 p.m. I'd like to welcome to the stage now our moderator, Richard Kaufman, and our fireside chat speaker, Alicia. Richard is the chairman of the New York Research and Development Authority and an adjunct senior research scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. Alicia is the CEO of First Light Power and the former CEO of both NYSERDA and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Richard and Alicia, it is great to have you both here. Over to you.
Thanks, Alberto, and thanks everybody for joining us. So, Alicia, we've known each other a long time, so I hope it's okay if we jump right in.
Thanks.
Well, since we're at Columbia, I thought I would bring up your old exam dream anxiety by starting out with a couple of fill-in-the-answer questions. So, the first is, the moment I knew that I wanted to spend my career in clean energy was...
Oh boy. Okay. So just so everybody knows, Richard and I have indeed known each other for a long time, and it's great to be here with you. And he did not give me any warning about these questions, so I'll do my best to keep up. So the moment I knew I wanted to spend my career on clean energy really, I think, goes back to probably like the 2007, 2008 time period. And so I was several years into my career at that time really focused on environmental issues, and all of my career had already been focused on climate change. But what I really realized at some point was that rather than focusing solely on regulating emissions from power plants, which was a big part of the focus that we had in the early 2000s, that, building the alternative energy system was going to be a lot more fun and exciting. And so around that time, we were just at the beginning of what became, for example, I was working in the state of Massachusetts, a significant ramp up and installed solar energy. And we were talking about, radical ideas about whether it would be feasible to power some of our buildings entirely on solar energy, and we're getting resounding skepticism from many people, which of course made me all the more interested in trying to figure out how to jump in and solve the problem. It was really focusing on, the fact that it's not just about solving climate change, but the fact that we have an opportunity to build better products, to create clean energy solutions that will be not only better for the environment but lower cost, create jobs along the way. Once all those pieces started to fall together, I knew that's what I wanted to work on.
Okay, that's good. So the next one is the question that I hope you would ask me first is...
Gosh, that's a tough one. Well, I was hoping that that you would ask me about what's changed maybe in terms of doing this business, working on advancing clean energy solutions in 2021 versus some of the many prior years that you and I have been working on these issues, because I do think this is a pretty different moment in time. Certainly with the political support that we've seen from President Biden and his new administration, but also just the more broad-based support that we see not only at the political level, but certainly the appetite from investors is really unprecedented and somewhat off the charts right now in terms of capital seeking opportunities in what they now realize is going to be an extraordinary growth opportunity. All of these things are things we've been talking about for a long time, but they feel very different to me in 2021. And that's something I hope to bring some perspective for maybe some of the participants at Columbia that haven't had the benefit of your and mine many years of experience on working to where we've gotten to today.
So you think we're at an inflection point, or what has to happen now? What's the next thing that's going to happen?
Well, I think we have to start. We are at an inflection point. I think things are different, and now what we have to do is start start building at a pace that is very different than what we've seen in the past. So, over the last, just pick a time period, the last decade, we've seen, an extraordinary ramp up in things like solar energy, for example, certainly installed wind capacity nationally. But other things, we're still really at the beginning stages. So offshore wind is an area that I've spent a lot of my career on, and unfortunately, we still only have 30 megawatts of installed capacity in the United States, and there's thousands of megawatts in the pipeline ready to go. But we've got to start building those projects to make sure that this inflection point is real. Again, I think the private capital is there. I think the public support and political support is there, but we have to start making this, from idea to reality. I think the same way about electric vehicles. And again, we see some exciting year-over-year increases in sales of electric vehicles, for example, but they're still at below 1% market penetration in virtually every market in the United States, save for California. So, we've got to start to harness this opportunity into progress that becomes more tangible on the ground.
So you mentioned offshore wind and you mentioned electric vehicles. And so that raises the question about the role of state policy versus federal policy. You also mentioned the Biden administration. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you see states and federal policies working together or in conflict?
Well, that's certainly something I've spent a lot of time on over the years in my work in New York and my work in Massachusetts. And there's never a simple answer for that. I mean, the truth of the matter is, though, of course, the sort of the, if you put aside the details on any specific topic, I think the posture and the leadership that comes out of the federal administration cannot be denied as either a powerful tailwind or a powerful headwind. And we've seen that, firsthand. The change, I think, in market perception of clean energy companies is not it's not coincidental that we've seen an explosion just since the time that President Biden was elected, and knowing that he was a candidate that had prioritized this issue. I think markets are anticipating that growth ahead, and they react even ahead of this new administration being able to really put in place many programs. It's only March; they've only been in office a couple of months. What we've seen from the Biden administration thus far is really more policy statements rather than implementing strategies, and that's not a criticism. They're running very fast from what I can tell. It's just I think it's noteworthy to say that even before they put in place the specific policies or programs that we do think will have impact, people are anticipating that impact. And we spent many years trying to overcome the headwinds we faced from the stated policies of the prior administration that cast a doubt on the validity of climate change, cast a doubt on the reliability of renewable energy, things that frankly are counterfactual, but they were out there and I think had an impact. States didn't let that hold them back, and we've seen extraordinary progress at the state level all across the country. Even in a very short amount of time, it's only been in the last 4 years, there are now 12 states that have actually adopted 100% clean electricity standards, in many cases by law, and others by executive order. That's really defied the contrast with the federal administration. And now that we have a federal administration that's going to not only get out of the way of those state efforts, but actually back them. I think we're at a turning point where the pace of progress, I hope, will actually be somewhat exponential from what we've seen in the past.
So earlier, you also talked about the capital and that's available. So you've been both in government and the private sector, more than one time in both, I would add. So the one thing, and very few people I think have had your experience then straddling both government and the private sector. So another fill in the answer questions coming. The one thing I would tell government about the private sector is
the need for predictability really is it really is fundamental. That is, I think, something that a lot of government leaders get, but it can be hard in practice to put in place durable and forward looking long duration policies. But that really is, I think, the single biggest driver of investment appetite and the like. I mean, I don't know if that's terribly novel. It's almost surprising in its simplicity, but those putting in place durable policies that the market that the private investment can look at and know will be there is the thing that makes everything go faster.
Oh, so you can guess then the next the next question I'm going to ask you is the one thing I would tell the private sector about government
is that it is hard to do what I just asked the government sector to do, and it is not for lack of intention in many cases, but it takes broad political capital. So, for example, the most durable policies tend to be those that come out of legislation, and we can think about this in the context of Washington D.C. today. We know that with President Biden administration and the executive branch and Democrats controlling Congress, but with a real split in the Senate, and yes, a tie-breaking vote, but with senators even that are Democrats that are quite centrist, it is difficult to get consensus around bipartisan solutions, even though that is by far the best outcome if you can get it. So sometimes that takes a lot of creativity and a lot of political will, and private markets can be impatient, I think, for those things sometimes. So I guess I would ask, and I do ask my fellow CEOs and some of our investors to understand the practical realities of putting in place policies that we might all agree could be transformative from an investment standpoint, and what are the barriers to getting there. And the private sector has a role in supporting those policies. If we are not active and engaged and making clear what the economic upside is of these policies, then that will make the job of leaders in the public sector even more difficult than it already is.
So you talked about legislation. So how much progress can we make without Congress doing something on a cost of carbon?
Boy, that is a great question, and one that many of us have wrestled with for a long time. I think we can make a lot of progress without it, which is not to say that we wouldn't make faster progress with it. I think we would. But again, I'd point to progress at the state level, where I think by and large, things like renewable portfolio standards, clean energy standards have been far more successful at scaling the actual deployment of clean energy than other carbon prices. For example, in the Northeast, we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, which actually does put a price on carbon emissions for power plants. So it's limited in scope. It's not an economy-wide carbon price by any means, but it has been very successful in some regards in raising actually allowance proceeds from the auctions to reinvest in energy efficiency and renewable energy at the state level, but it hasn't been particularly effective at changing the resource mix. On the contrary, however, things like the clean energy standard in New York have been successful in doing that. I think what would be most powerful, without a doubt, would be the two working hand in hand. Specific procurement strategies, for example, with an underlying carbon price, I think would be transformative, but no doubt there's going to be difficulties in terms of the bipartisan support for, well, really for either of those at the federal level.
So you've talked about standards. So the question that, and I've talked about this before, so maybe we can both talk about this a little bit. But the role of mandates, which would be the clean energy standard, or what the Biden administration is talking about as a broader national mandate, with the role of markets, and how do you see, is there a tension between the two or a conflict between the two?
I think that in some cases there is a tension, and in some cases there's an outright conflict, and so you have to get a little more specific. And you and I have talked about this many times over the years. I think it in the places where it's possible to push forward market solutions, I think many people, myself included, would argue that that's a better outcome. But that's not the case for every policy need. So maybe just we could talk about a couple examples. You might have a couple that you think of. So in my current role at First Light Power, we are a clean energy producer, and we sell predominantly as a business model today into wholesale energy markets in New England. Those markets do not incorporate any compensation for clean energy or carbon content or anything, any environmental attributes of any kind. That has caused the states to do something very reasonable, which is to say they would create REC programs or even long-term contract programs, really the mandates you're talking about, in order to get that outcome. We are increasingly reaching a point where the disconnect between the wholesale energy markets and state policies is really a risk point for all of us, including those of us like myself that believe strongly that we need to scale clean energy as fast as possible. If we can get to a bridge that will actually bring those clean energy attributes into the market, I think there's a lot of recognition that could be extremely powerful, and that's something that Northeast states are looking at. But I think there's other places where a market won't necessarily solve the issue. And, I do think I go to the example a lot on building codes, where, putting in place a mandate for a certain level of energy efficiency or a certain level, as we see in next generation building codes, of carbon content, where you set that floor and minimum requirements for an entire industry, is something that is likely needed, absent, right now, any real way to monetize those attributes in the construction and building sector. We just don't have good examples for markets in that context. So those are a couple I think about. I don't know how you reflect on those, Richard.
Well, I think the thing that I'm torn about this, because you talked about earlier about the thing you would tell government about the private sector is certainty. So I certainly get the idea that a mandate gives a clear market message, market signal to the private sector about government's commitment and intention, and establishes a large market potential. We certainly saw that in terms of offshore wind. But when I think about the challenges of building smart grid, I think about the sort of what we heard from the storage industry that said, well, we want to have a storage mandate. My answer is, well, how do we know? I understand that it's good for your industry, the battery industry, to have a mandate, but how do we know that the answer isn't thermal storage as opposed to electricity storage? Or how do we know that the answer isn't a software solution? And because we didn't rebuild the telephony system with government saying this is the number and kind of switches or pieces of equipment. We set broad policy objectives and let markets figure out how to allocate the capital. So I'm torn about it.
Yeah, there is a risk that you disincentivize innovation, for sure, if you have mandates that are overly prescriptive, and those are not hypothetical risks. I would say just to pick on an example that that I'm particularly close to, because I've had a hand in creating it to a degree over the years. Some of the long-term contracts for renewable energy, and this kind of gets to what I was just mentioning about the conflict between, state policies and the lack of recognition of those policies in wholesale electricity markets. Some of those contracts are incredibly favorable if for the purposes of creating simple financing structures to get a project financed and constructed. They do not necessarily incentivize the generator of renewable energy. Again, my company is one of them. In doing the most with that output. So, for example, as we get to higher penetrations of renewable energy in various parts of the grid, we see it in California now with the duck curve that I think many people are familiar with. We're even in cloudy and cold New England starting to see a duck curve emerge pretty significantly, and we will see a significant amount of offshore wind that is all generating at the same time, and may in fact be generating excess above demand on the system and lead to negative prices. Some of those contracting structures do not allow you to do the smart thing, which would be to store that excess clean renewable energy and move it to a different time of the day when it was needed. The contracts actually prohibit that in some cases, like in the case of the contracts for offshore wind in New England, where the generator would be incentivized to curtail, just simply stop generating and essentially waste offshore wind, for example, rather than to store it in a battery and move it to a different part of the day. So those are some of the trade-offs that we have to think about for sure. And as might be natural in human nature, I think most about the ones that where I wish we had gotten it right previously when I was having some of these thoughts and putting some of the policies in place. So collectively, we're going through a maturity process as an industry, and we're going to have to think hard about those trade-offs.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about all that offshore wind and curtailing as opposed to maybe making hydrogen or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's and again, it's because a simple contract structure is great when your goal is to go take that contract and finance it and get it built. But then when you think about what will I want to do over the 30-year operating life of this facility, then this questions take on a little bit different color. And that's what, part of what I urge all of us, including particularly renewable energy developers and renewable energy buyers, to start thinking about.
So another thing about we talked about mandates, talk about financing. Well, another part of the way that we support clean energy in terms of financing is through surcharges on customer bills, and that's really effectively a regressive tax, since lower income people pay a higher percentage of their incomes anyway on electricity. But then when we think about supporting clean energy, we add to that burden, and often lower income people don't have the same access. So how do we deal with equity?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think also, first of all, is an incredibly important topic, and one that collectively as an industry we have not made enough progress towards advancing the models that will address those issues. And again, I put that in the category of things where we've still got a lot of work to do, despite all the progress we've made recently. I think there are some programs, in pilot stage that try to get to these issues, but none of them I think are perfect. I don't disagree with your characterization at all that surcharges, or, for example, charges on fuel sales that might be used to fund clean vehicle infrastructure, they are inherently regressive, and we do have to worry about that. There can be, safety net programs that allow some subsidies to go to the truly lowest income ratepayers, for example. That is one way to alleviate the direct burden. There's also programs to, I think, create the economic incentives for participation in the growth that we will see around clean energy. So if you think about, for example, one of the programs that's been successful at stimulating clean energy deployment in New York is the New York Sun program. It has, in recent years, put aside larger amounts of money to try to work with communities, disadvantaged communities, to make sure they will get the benefits of solar energy through things like direct ownership models, subsidies for participation by those individual homeowners. Those are some models that aim to reduce that barrier to participation, but we haven't seen that deployed broadly at scale. So, this is something, candidly, we've just got a lot of work to do to figure out.
So you mentioned New York State. So there's a panel coming up on New York State policy. So what's a policy or a story or anything else that comes to mind that you'd want to share that sets the stage for that discussion?
Well, I think New York really has been on the forefront of a number of these issues, and certainly, scaling new clean energy, the emergence of offshore wind into eventually, the New York electricity market. Those are really cutting edge developments, and people should be looking at New York as a model that other states might follow. So I'd put that out there. But also with this last topic and how to channel benefits to disadvantaged communities, that is a requirement under New York's landmark climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And again, New York's going to have to pioneer some approaches in order to make that reality. The other thing I'll just say, as someone who left New York not quite a year ago, that I've been watching from not too far, but from where I live in Massachusetts now, is a bill that has come out of the Senate to force retirement of fossil peaking units and repower them with solar and batteries. To my knowledge, that's not been done anywhere else, and it has not passed the legislature or reached the governor's desk. But that's one that I'm following closely. That again, I think is it gets at environmental justice issues. It gets at access to clean energy investment issues. It gets at public health issues and the disparity we have seen for minority communities and suffering from, for example, the impacts of COVID-19 because of the historic exposure to air pollution that has made them more vulnerable to respiratory disease. There's a lot there. And again, not a lot of models off the shelf for New York to look at for how to do that in a way that preserves reliability and affordability in the electric system. So I'll be watching and trying to understand whether that has a chance of moving forward, which I think could be really transformative for the country.
Okay, well, we, as Justice Brandeis has said, that states are laboratories of democracy. So it's good to watch what New York has done, and as you pointed out earlier, what other states have been doing. So I'd like to take a deeper dive into what you're doing at First Light. So maybe you can describe what First Light more is doing and where you want to take the company and how you see it fitting into this broad set of transition issues we've discussed.
Sure, I'm happy to. So First Light Power, we are the largest clean power producing portfolio operating in ISO New England. We have about 1,400 megawatts in our portfolio of clean generation in the form of pumped hydro storage, solar generation, hydro generation, as well as battery storage assets. And when we think about that, that kind of makes us a renewable energy generator as well as an energy storage provider. We own and operate the largest energy storage asset in New England. And when we think about what's ahead for our markets, again, the emergence of vast amounts of offshore wind, solar, and other variable renewables, I really try to think about, and what we're trying to accomplish is becoming a platform integrator of variable renewable energy that can deliver a reliable and fully clean electric grid for New England. We have a few different efforts underway in terms of how we see that happening, but it gets a little bit to this maturation concept I was talking about, where we do have to continue to stimulate investment in new renewables and to have policies like clean energy standards and long-term contracts that will do that. But we also need to understand that the delivery of firm, dispatchable, clean electricity is what we need at the end of the day to make the system work. And so there's a lot of room for innovation in our approaches to delivering not just renewable energy certificates, but actual firm, clean electricity that customers can rely on. I think there's a number of large corporate buyers that are putting out really interesting pledges in this regard. So Google is one that I've been particularly impressed by. They have a vision for 24/7 clean electricity. Again, recognizing that they could purchase RECs to meet their clean energy commitments and say they're 100% fully clean, but unless they're actually running their operations on electricity that's generated from clean resources and relying on backup capacity from clean resources as opposed to dirty resources, they will fail to meet their decarbonization objectives. And we are on the other side of that as a solution provider, really trying to pioneer some new products that will aim to allow all of us to make that conversion even faster.
All right, so you talked to, I want to follow up on this. Very interesting. So you talked about innovation. So how much innovation here to solve Google's problem, or try to solve what Google wants to achieve? I don't know if it's a problem or solution here. How much is that going to require innovation in technology? How much is that going to actually deliver that clean energy load following power, clean load following power to Google? How much is that going to require innovation in technology? How much of that is going to involve innovation and regulation at the federal or state level? How much is that going to involve innovation in the utility business model? Because the utilities are going to have to be the route to get it to the customer.
Yeah, so there is work to do in all of those categories, and not surprisingly, but I would put them in sort of in order of focus. And I think the first really has to be innovation in our, and this one I think is well within our power to fix, is innovation in our policy and regulatory models. Again, sort of making sure that that there are not disincentives to storing clean electricity and delivering it when it's most valuable, like I talked about a few minutes ago. Making sure that there are policy structures that support delivery of things like hybrid plants, where you have, for example, hydroelectricity plus storage with a battery. Hydroelectricity plus solar generation with a battery storage opportunity, and those hybrid assets are actually allowed to compete and offer those products alongside standalone renewable energy sources. That's also going to take innovation, again, in the sort of corporate buying attitudes, and that's a lot what Google is pushing forward. But that's kind of step one, and I think we can make a tremendous amount of progress if we tackle that. The technology innovation will need to be there as well. I think there is a need for other types of longer duration storage and combination. As I think about storage, I think we will see interesting operational combinations of things like shorter duration batteries, longer duration pumped hydro storage, and even longer duration, breakthrough technologies that may provide multi-day storage, but that are really only designed to operate really occasionally and not on a daily basis or even an hour-to-hour basis like batteries are or like pumped hydro is. And sort of seeing that range of operational flexibility get delivered again by combinations of resources rather than putting everything in its own silo and saying there's a solar program and you can deliver solar and you get a simple payment for this, and you can have a program for offshore wind generation and you can have a program for batteries. I think getting to the point where we can see those and allow innovators to deliver those things in combination is going to be a really, really important near-term step that I'm optimistic we will see progress on in the not too distant future.
Well, this is kind of going back to the first part of the conversation and the inflection points. What you're describing though is the need of much more systemic kind of thinking, not only taking into account different technology solutions working together, but integration of and change in policies to look at the whole.
Yes, that is what I'm suggesting, and I guess I hope, as I've said it to you, it doesn't sound too far-fetched. I have a lot of confidence that we'll be able to make progress on that, and not that it's easy, but I think in particular this industry has been. The clean energy industry has been really successful at rising to meet those challenges and to creating new products and solutions and delivering them. Again, if the policy signals are there to create enough certainty to drive investment to those outcomes.
Okay, so we're coming close to the end. So I've got a couple of more fill in the answer kind of questions, but you can take your time in answering them. So the one thing that I know now about clean energy that I wish I knew when I started is
that sometimes progress takes a very long time, and then happens all at once. Richard knows this. I'm a very impatient person by nature, so it has been challenging over the years to work on some things that have taken a lot longer than they would have. But all of that work was directionally correct and has set us up for better success. And so things that look like a setback in the immediate term don't always look that way to me when I have the benefit of distance looking back. Whether that be individual projects that failed, but then set up broader progress for an industry, or longer term policy trajectories. I think it's the time horizons that I think I've learned the most about in my career working on these issues.
okay. So the one question I always wanted to ask Richard was,
Richard, what really prompted you and motivated you to make a career change from the finance sector and investment banking to your dogged pursuit of climate progress?
well, so for me, it was really the completion of a long arc in my life, because when I was my first year in university was the year of the first energy crisis, and I'd finally saved up enough money to buy a car, and people have seen the old photographs of people the gas crisis and people waiting in line. And it really seemed at that time, not that there was a problem of regulation, but that there was really going to be a shortage. And there was a popular book at that time called Limits to Growth, which forecasted out different raw materials and how we were going to be running out of key resources. And those forecasts turned out to be wrong at that point, but it really made a big difference in how I thought about my education, and I actually lived at a place. I went to Stanford where we had solar hot water, and we composted and stuff like that in the early days. So for me, I'd always thought I would take what I learned in finance and have the opportunity to apply it to something that had greater social utility. And so it took me a lot longer to tack back. But when I had the opportunity, I guess more than 15 years ago, I seized the opportunity. And I think the thing that was interesting to me about coming into, at that point, clean energy investing was
Richard, are you there? Okay, it looks like Richard froze. Maybe he'll come back. So maybe we'll get Richard back and or Alberto to help wrap up the conversation, because I know we're close to time. Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I spoke too long. Why don't we go to you? And because I was droning on there, I think the computer, there really is AI in the world. The one advice that you would give to students interested in a career in clean energy would be?
To think about which segment of the industry appeals to you most. It is a very diverse industry from the perspective of the roles that are out there. I think there can be a real focus on engineering and finance, which are important. And if those are the skills and the passions that you have, then I would zero in on those. But I'm as Richard knows, I'm a lawyer by training, so I've come to my role as CEO perhaps a little more non-traditionally, and I think there's a lot of room for different skill sets, different perspectives. It's not all about just being on the policy side or the finance side. We really need all the talent available to do something as audacious as trying to tackle climate change and change the way we all use and generate energy. So we need every talent that's out there, and don't get discouraged if you think you don't fit the narrow mold of looking strictly at an MBA program or the like.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, I think that's a great answer, is just get started. I mean, it's a dynamic industry, and lots, as you pointed out, Alicia, lots changing. And so technology is changing, policies are changing, capital's changing, and so just get started. And as Alicia says, any experience is going to be valuable, whether it's a finance or development or policy, all will be useful, because it requires all these pieces to work together to make the transition successful.
And it's really hard. So I would encourage people, if you're thinking about it, to ask that question of yourself: is, do you want to do something? Yes, it's important, but that's also hard. And for me, that's a big part of the attraction, is to be on the front lines of creating new solutions, not just doing things we already know how to do. You have to really want to invest on rolling up sleeves and tackling totally novel challenges.
All right, Alicia, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
I want to thank both of you again. I think I can speak for all of us that we truly enjoyed this conversation between the two of you. So Alicia, thank you. Richard, thank you. And I hope both of you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.